and Community Services Standing Committee in the town of Collingwood. I want to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place virtually on the land on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, including the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe peoples, and on the lands connected with the Lake Simcoe-Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818. This is the home of a diverse range of Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors to our society. And I'm looking for a motion to adopt the agenda, and it is moved by Mayor Saunderson and seconded by Councillor Madigan that the content of the Corporate and Community Services Standing Committee agenda for May the 4th, 2020 be adopted as presented. May I have a call to vote on that? Terrific. I am in favor as well, so that is carried. And next item on our agenda is business arising from the previous meeting. And before I move on to that, I would like to welcome to this webinar standing committee meeting our acting CAO, Sonia Skinner. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to working with you at the town for the foreseeable future. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Chair.
So, business arising from the previous meeting, is there any? Committee, seeing none, we'll move on to declarations of pecuniary interest. And do we have any declarations of pecuniary interest at this meeting? I guess we should be using these. Look at that, how clever. I have none either. Mayor Saunderson's is not either. So seeing none, we'll move on to item number 5 on our agenda, which is deputations. And we are going to hear, hopefully, Clerk Almus are our guests with us. They are. Bruce Rogers and Gary Green from the organization Save Georgian Bay are joining us with a deputation to talk about the impact of the proposed hydroelectric pumped storage plant in Meaford. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us virtually today. And I can see Bruce and I can see Gary. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us today. Someone will be running your microphones. I can see from here, Mr. Rogers, that your microphone is muted, and they're both on now. So thank you for joining us. Tell us what it is you have to say.
Thank you, councillors, for having us today. Both Bruce and I, we're residents at the in Meaford, and we actually are very close to where the power plant would be put in. So that's just kind of where we're concerned residents. We I have no credentials really, except I'm a Bachelor of Science degree. Bruce is a engineer, and he is also an environmental consultant. If and when you have any questions, please direct them to Bruce, because he will be the best one to answer those questions. So I know we've only got 10 minutes, so this is going to be pretty quick. If you look up at the very top of this photo, this is the shoreline of Georgian Bay up past Meaford. And if you go around the first bump on the top right and into the cove, that is where the power plant would be located. Next slide. And so that's just a nice pictorial view. But at Save Georgian Bay, we're a group of residents, but we have electrical engineers, industry consultants, and a lot of people that know a lot about power and power grids and power plants. So we're blessed to have that. So we just want to introduce you to the Tcc Proposal, which is a 1,000 megawatt hydro pump storage plant that is proposed to go on the Canadian training base up here in Meaford. Next slide, please. And the goal, you've probably heard, I don't know whether you've heard of Save Georgian Bay or not. We've certainly been around and in the news a little bit. Our goal really is just to bring this to people's attention. And we're looking at environmental, economic, and social impact on this area, which is kind of the greater, what we used to call anyway, the Georgian Triangle. Here, next slide. So I'd just like to talk for a minute about how pump storage plants work. A few facts about pump storage facilities. This plant is modeled after one that is on the shores in Lake Michigan called it's the Ludington plant. It's in a little township called Ludington. And then we have a few thoughts about the project. Next slide, please. So this is how pump storage works. You basically have a lower and upper reservoir. And the whole idea is that you pump water from low reservoir to high, and you store it up top as potential energy, which in fact, you could call it a battery. So it's storing electricity as potential energy. When the need for power is high, the water is released back down into the lower reservoir. So it goes from lower to upper and back down again. The whole idea of this is that power is cheap at night. So you pump water uphill at night when power is cheap, and then you release it during the day when power is much more expensive. And TC Energy would make money on the spread. There, next slide, please. So a few facts. There are open and closed loop pump storage. So open loop would be what this design is going to be. At least that's the proposal at this point. So this plant would suck a lot of water out of Georgian Bay and return it to the bay. And that's what Ludington does. Ludington was built in 1969. Basically, it consumes power at night when demand is low, and it's the turbines that generate the power are reversed. So there's power put on the turbines, and it's the turbines that pump the water back up the hill again. And so, you know, basically, it's an interesting fact. This is a net consumer of power. So you put more into it than you actually get back out of it again. So they're about 70% efficient, these plants, somewhere in that range. So this particular plant would actually consume 1,300 megawatts of power to later generate 1,000 megawatts. And just interesting, it is a generating plant, but it's also a storage. It's like a battery. So it doesn't replace nuclear gas powered plant. Next slide, please, Chris. Other facts, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 permanent jobs. TCE keeps changing their number a little bit. There's significant earth moving to create a 375 acre reservoir. That's like 1.9 miles by 0.9 kilometers, or 1.7 by 0.9 kilometer dimensions, and it's about 20 meters deep, or 60 to 70 feet. To build all this, TCE is saying there would be about 800 temporary jobs. When it's all said and done, this reservoir would hold about 23 million cubic meters of water, or 6 billion imperial gallons. We're talking a ginormous structure up here. This is a ginormous civil engineering project. The pumping station, there are a lot of residents around here. So, you know, when we talked to John Nicholson, who is the chief engineer of this project, they came out last summer. We actually took them out in the boat to show them the area, because they'd never seen the area except on Google Maps from their offices in Toronto. And the station would be just 1,000 meters from the nearest resident. So it's, you know, it's pretty close to us anyway. There'd be 1,000-foot break wall paralleling the shoreline, 500 feet offshore. It's a large open intake on the shoreline, a large turbine station in the cove, and then high tension wires would run from Meaford all the way to ESSA, to a little transfer, well, a giant node in the grid where you can plug in like 1,000 megawatts of power. That's in Grenfell, Ontario, which is in ESSA Township. Next slide, please. We'll talk about more high tension in a second. So this is a map. This is the very end of the road, Sunnyside Beach in Meaford. The yellow dotted line is the range perimeter on the south side. We've got the lake sort of on the east side. There's the reservoir up top. And it's notable that if you follow that dotted line up and over and up and over again, and the blue line where it intersects, there are all kinds of properties right below that reservoir. If that reservoir were to ever breach, it would be like Niagara Falls coming down on us. Next slide, please. That's a view of the range. That big white area is the main area of the base. and all the firing and training goes north of that, and the reservoir would be tucked in on the east and south side. So to the right and below is where that reservoir would go. And you can see that Georgian Beach and all the way along there is very populated area in the summertime. Next slide, please. And of course, that's what the shoreline looks like now. And next slide, please. This is a depiction. This is Ludington being built in 1969 to 70. And this is what that shoreline would look like during building. Now they green it up a bit after that, but that's basically what it looks like. They completely stripped the area. This is a ginormous project, as I said before. Next slide, please. That is the intake and the turbines and the break wall. And you can just make out an outer perimeter. There's a little very faint white line. That is a fish net to catch fish so that they don't get sucked into the plant. Next slide. That's what one of the turbines looks like. That's the size of it. Next slide, please. That's Ludington from the air or from satellite. And you can see as it's discharging during the day, the turbidity in the water offshore. Next slide, please. You can see the turbidity going out around the break wall there. It looks like it's stirring up all the clay in the water. And Chris, next slide. Same thing, next slide. There you go. So that's what this plant has been operating since 1969. This is potentially what it could do to Nottawasaga Bay every single day of the year. Now, Lake Michigan is about 7 times the size of Georgian Bay. We feel that that Georgian Bay is going to take a beating with this plant on our shoreline. Next slide, please. This is what these are like 50 kilovolt towers. Next slide. And this is what it looks like coming off the plant in Ludington. Meaford would be very similar. The next slide. And that's the corridor that could be running through Collingwood at some point. So next slide. So the proposed route, some are subsea, although we've been told subsea is very expensive for TransCanada. Likely it would be a land route, but we don't know. We just don't know. So the land route would go from Meaford all the way to Essa Township. It would go somehow past Thornbury, Collingwood, Stainer, and hit that bottom right-hand corner. If it's subsea, that one subsea cable is coming up at the Craigleith Provincial Park and going up through somewhere around the Alpine Ski Club, but we don't know this for sure. The other one would come out just north of Stainer on Georgian Bay somewhere. So we have a monster transmission line that potentially will go from Meaford to the substation. Now keep in mind, there's only one line. This plant probably will use a lot of power from the nuclear plant in the Bruce. And so this line will go in 2 directions so that the power will flow in 2 directions. So it will come up to the plant, power it all night, and suck up all that power to pump the water up. And then in the daytime, if it does generate power, the power will go back down the same transmission line into the grid. Next slide, please. And so you saw that giant turbine and all the water turbidity. These plants grind up fish like crazy. They suck in everything along the shore. If you were a swimmer, like a person swimming anywhere near this thing, you could potentially get sucked into it. So it's like, this is in jest a little bit, but this is like a giant Cuisinart sitting on the shore of Georgian Bay, sucking in everything in its path, fish, birds, whatever happens to be on the surface, and then spitting it back out again later. Next slide, please. So we have concerns. We've put them into a couple of different categories, but we're worried about water clarity, 4-year construction period up to 2022. Digging up clay on the bottom of Georgian Bay is an issue that could send a plume of turbidity as far as Thornbury, maybe further down, because the current goes along the shore in the southern direction. The lake up above would be an asphalt concrete a base, and so you've got hydrocarbons in asphalt that would mix with the water and be released into the bay. A daily input, that's 6 billion gallons a day. And don't quote us on this, but it's somewhere around 42% of the flow of Niagara Falls. Now that depends on just how long. We're basing that, I believe, on 7.5 hours, 8 hours, somewhere in there. The impact on fish, so sucking fish in, the word for that is entrainment. The Ludington plant killed 150 million fish per year when it first started up in 1972. And with the mitigation net that after a big lawsuit, the net was put in place, it's got to be put in the spring and taken out in the fall because the water or the ice will tear it apart. So it's only in place for, the summer, the spring, summer, fall season. The fish kill has gone from 150 million fish to only 22 million now. And, you can decide, I guess, whether you feel that would be an acceptable number or not. It's an irrevocable decision. So this plant, this is a giant monstrosity. There's tons of concrete and everything. This plant will be put on the shoreline up here and it will be there forever. It's got a 40 to 50 year lifespan, but it will, they're never going to take it down again. It'll be there permanently. Nobody goes in and it's like trying to remove the Collingwood grain elevator, and it's probably about the same size. And then the company's talking about greenhouse emissions. They're calling this Canada's biggest greenhouse initiative. We actually have data to show that this is not, this is good for Ontario. You got to read the fine print. This will lower the emissions in Ontario, but because the world has a world atmosphere and envelope, if we reduce our emissions here, it's at the cost of Iowa, Kentucky, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York State that still burn coal, that buy our cheap power at night and throttle down their coal-fired plants in preference of buying our cheap power. So if we clean up Ontario, the US actually coal plants will fire more and create more greenhouse gases. So this could be one of Canada's worst greenhouse initiatives when you look at it.
Mr. Green, I'm
slide,
sorry
please.
to interrupt you. You're at 13 minutes.
Okay, thank you. We're almost done. Never talked so fast in my life. Next slide, Chris, please. Excellent. So safety concerns, economic concerns. If you're living downhill from a giant reservoir, there's always a risk of a breach. And that you could get flooded out or potentially even killed, something like that. So that would be a real disaster. The TC is talking about real savings in our monthly hydro bills. These guys are, they basically kind of own and run our power system. Everything they're doing here is really to the profit of TCE. And they've got lots of facts and figures, but I think it's going to be difficult to determine just how this will all play out. But it's hard to believe at this point that the taxpayer won't be on the hook for paying for this $3.3 billion plant. We certainly have the same issue with pipelines and that sort of thing. So what we do is we get locked into very long-term contracts that TCE puts in place to be providers of shipping hydrocarbons through pipelines or storing power. It'd be the same kind of thing. Somebody has to pay for that. Tourism and fishing on the bay, people that sail, swim, come to the area for the natural beauty. This is an area of beauty, as you know. You all live here because you probably love to be in Collingwood and the greater area. So we want to, we're not an anti-development group by any means. And in some ways, power storage is a great idea. It's just how it's done. Bruce can address that more if you have any questions for Bruce. Next slide, please. And I think that's it then, Chris. Is that my last slide? Good. Okay. Thank you very much for your attention. Appreciate that. Bruce Rogers is there, and please direct some questions to Bruce if you wish to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary and Bruce and Mr. Rogers and Mr. Green. Does anyone from the from this committee have any questions? A motion has been prepared by staff regarding this deputation, and I'll look to the clerk just for one moment to see whether we are going to ask for that to be brought forward. Was that distributed to all members of the committee, or?
No, we had something prepared in the event that the committee wanted to pursue any sort of action on this item.
I see. Does any member of the committee want to pursue some action at this time, or will we say thank you or to Mr. Rogers and Mr. Green? Mayor Saunderson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I guess before we would look at any action, I just would be interested in hearing what's the status of the project now, and where are they in the whole process?
Gentlemen?
Gary, you want to address that or?
No, that's for you, Bruce.
Okay. The status of the process is they have an agreement with the Department of National Defense to access their property for a 1-year period of time so that they can do their preliminary engineering work on the property. They're doing that now. The original deadline of that was March 31st, which the Department of National Defense has extended to July 31st, at which time that window closes and the Department of National Defense will make their determination of whether they wish to extend that window any longer or to allow TCE any further access to that property or not. So part of the process is still in the hands of the Department of National Defense to make their determination. In the meantime, TransCanada Energy is continuing with their engineering studies of designing and assessing the feasibility of this initiative. They have not undertaken any environmental work as of this time.
Just follow up, Madam Chair. So in terms of the process, should this project start to move forward, what levels of public input are involved and what levels of government approvals are involved as this thing, if it starts to get pushed forward?
There's decision gates. So the first decision gate will be July 31st, and that will be the decision from the Department of National Defense of whether they can see clear to releasing a portion of their land for this project. And so that's a decision for them to make on the grounds of how it interferes with their ability to fulfill their mandate, which is to train Canadian troops. After that decision gate, the next decision gate is one where it goes through a formal environmental impact assessment process with the federal government. And that's a multi-year process that would involve further stakeholder engagement. So there's a stakeholder engagement process right now to fulfill the Department of National Defense mandate. And then after that decision gate, if it proceeds, then there would be other public engagement processes, a part of the Impact Assessment Act. And that'll extend for many years.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Any other questions from the members of the committee? Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Green and Mr. Rogers. We appreciate you taking the time and putting together a very informative presentation for us.
Thank you. Very grateful to be able to get in front of you folks. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have no other deputations this afternoon as far as I can see from my agenda, which brings us to staff reports. And before I get into that, anyone who happens to be watching this on our webcast from Town Hall and Clerk Almus, we are on Rogers or we are not on Rogers as far as you understand it?
We haven't got confirmation. Regardless, they will be airing it at a different time if they aren't doing it live.
Great. Well, you may notice, anyone who happens to be watching, that most of us are wearing a little bit of green today. And the reason for that is because it is called the Shine Green for Children's Mental Health. because it is by a group called New Path, which is concerned with children's mental health particularly. And so this is Children's Mental Health Week across Canada. And so we are wearing green in support of, especially during these difficult times when kids are at home and can't see their friends and can't go to all the birthday parties, and that might be causing some stress and so on. So we're especially concerned with mental health this week. So we are being supportive of New Path and supportive of the children of our community. So thank you to the folks at New Path for bringing that to our attention. And thank you to my fellow committee members for taking part and in that particular activity. So we move on now to number 6 on our agenda, which is staff reports. And I'm going to turn first to, I believe, Director Culver for PRC 2020-5, which is allocation of the 2020 CRCG program. Director Culver.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is basically normally what we would do this time of year, or actually even a little bit earlier than in the year, is we would divulge to council the list of recipients of the CRCG, the Community Recreation and Culture Grant. And this sort of informs council and the public of who is successful in acquiring grant allocation of the budgeted $50,000 each year. So that process went through prior to sort of the COVID lockdown descending, but the report didn't make it to council. So we're sort of doing a little bit of catch up here. And so you'll see that there is the list of recipients identified and the amount they received under the new process that council approved when we changed the CRCG program late last year. I feel like that process, by the way, was quite successful. We got some good feedback, and I guess time will tell exactly whether or not we're executing and delivering on the intention of the fund. But certainly, it feels really good at this point that that adjustment was positive. The other thing to note in the report, though, is that obviously with the pandemic weighing heavily on everyone, staff felt that it was going to be difficult to ask people to fulfill on the promises that they made in their application to the CRG grant, or at least a majority. A lot of them have to do with, programs that require gathering or engaging people physically. So this is obviously impossible in these days. And as well, as everybody is aware, it's a time when people are just struggling. Organizations like many of the not-for-profits that are recipients of this fund are struggling just to kind of keep their head above water and figure out how to navigate through times when they can't do fundraising, when they can't even imagine how to proceed. So staff came up with a recommendation you'll find in the report, which is to alter expectations this year to allow these organizations to either bank the money for next year in the hope that they can carry on in their program next year, or utilize the money, in this case, in this year, for sustainability, for ways to help their organization to essentially stay afloat through the end of the year. There is a requirement that they report back to us by the end of this year if they're using the funds for sustainability, and by the end of next year to just again follow through on the normal pattern of reporting, post-reporting on the grant fund, to let us know that they were successful in achieving the outcome based on which they applied. So I think that sort of sums it up. I'm happy to take any questions you have about it, though.
Thank you, Director Culver. Any questions from the committee members? Well then, and I suppose we also ask if there are questions from the public. We have several people who are attendees of our committee meeting. This is very, very different how we're doing things today. You can't just put up, well, you actually can put up your hand. Clerk Almus, if you would be so kind, would you go through for the attendees who are within our Zoom meeting, how they may, if they choose, ask a question of the committee or of Director Culver regarding this report or anything else to come?
Certainly through Chair McLeod, we would ask that any attendees that wish to speak to either hit the raise your hand function tab that's on the bottom of your screen, or you're welcome to type a question within that function, or you're welcome to announce through the chat that you would like to participate in the call, and then one of our staff members would unmute your audio.
Oh, we're living in such a new world, aren't we? So I'm just going to give maybe a few seconds while anyone who's interested takes a moment to figure out that. And if they do not, in the next few seconds, we'll move on to questions from the, we'll actually ask for a mover and a seconder on accepting this report and then move into questions from the committee. Okay, so seeing no public comment, we have a motion on the table, PRC 2020-05, allocation of the 2020 CRCG program, moved by Councillor Madigan and seconded by Councillor Berman, that the council receive staff report PRC 2020-05, allocation of the 2020 Community Recreation and Culture Grant Program, and that council approve that 2020 grant recipients be permitted to retain their grant funds with no penalties, provided it be used prior to December 31, 2021 for its intended purpose or to ensure the organization's business continuity during COVID-19. So we have a mover and a seconder. Do we have any comments or questions from the members of the committee for Director Culver regarding this report? Seeing none, I have one, and that is to do with the second paragraph of our motion in front of us, and provided that it be used prior to December 31st of 2021 for its intended purpose. Director Culver, you mentioned a little bit about that in the discussion that you had with us prior to. Could you just, for my edification, go through that timeline once again? And I apologize, I was listening mostly.
No,
But
no, it's okay.
I wonder if you could maybe just re-clarify that for me.
Sure, Chair. So basically, when an organization applies for the funding, they have a specific application in mind, and that gets vetted through the public committee that's struck, as well as some filters that are developed within the staff process. And then there's some accountability following up, saying we use the money for this, and then this is what the outcome was. And that's our measurement. That's our way of understanding whether what it was applied to matches up with the PRC mandate and all of our programs and service delivery. So you understand that from our deep dive last year. So given how things have rolled out, we basically are just removing the pressure to come full circle and apply for that, or to fulfill that expectation that they made when they were applying. And we're essentially rolling it forward 1 year, so that if they, and I'll use an example, there's the Port Music Festival is one of the recipients. Well, the Port Music Festival is unlikely to happen in that form this year, in its traditional form, but they can hold on to the money and then have their event in 2021. And then report back to us on things like attendance, who was impacted, et cetera, how many artists were involved, et cetera, and completely just run the program. It's just sort of a deferral for a year. Alternately, they may say, you know what, without this money, being able to use this money now, we won't have a Port Music Festival next year. So we're going to apply that money in a specific way and let you know what that is by the end of this year. So let you know that we're doing this as a way to be sustainable going forward with some explicit responsibility. And that way, if they spend it this year and it's on sustainability, they're eligible to participate next year in the grant program. If they save it for next year, they're not eligible to double dip into the program next year, that they'll actually use that money for its intended purpose, but in 2021 instead of 2020. I hope that's clear.
That is exactly what I was wondering regarding the, as you said, the double dipping, because I was thinking, wow, we're going to have some amazing festivals next year
No.
with twice as much funding, but it's sustainable or next year. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. That was excellent answer to what I was asking. And so with that, and no questions or comments from the committee, I will ask for the vote on this report. And that is unanimous. Thank you, committee. Moving on to our next agenda item, which is reports and minutes of other committees and boards. And our motion is moved by Councillor Berman and seconded by Mayor Saunderson that the minutes of the various committees and boards provided below be received. And those are the Accessibility Advisory Committee from February 26th of 2020, the Collingwood Downtown BIA Board of Management, February 13 and March 12, 2020, the Museum Advisory Committee, February 20, 2020, and the Trails Advisory Committee, February 13 and March 12. Is there any discussion on any of these reports? Councillor Berman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Couple of quick ones, if I can find them, it's quick. Under the Accessibility Advisory Committee one, there is section 8.2, review barrier identification complaints. And it says Clerk Almus provided a brief overview of current litigation involving a human rights claim regarding the 2017 Elvis Festival. That obviously predates me, and I'm wondering if that's something that at a proper time, SIC Council in camera, I don't know what it was, if maybe this council could be updated on it.
Clerk Almus?
Certainly, I can just provide a very brief overview. One of our hired contractors for the Elvis Festival back in 2017 were responsible for security into specific access areas. And one of the areas was one of the accessible seating areas. And the individual was concerned that they felt that their rights had been violated. So we're pursuing that right now, and we'll provide further updates to council when we have any.
Okay, great. And then my second question of similar pattern is just on the clarification. Both of the BIA minutes that are in here, the February 13th and March 12th, make reference to section 5.3 MOU update, and that there's no update. And I don't know anything about this other than hearing that this has been a long time in the process, and I don't even know who's dealing with it from the town to the BIA. So I was wondering again if there's an appropriate time, or if you want to do a quick update now. It didn't matter to me, just that I kind of wanted to know who's looking after it between the town and the BIA, and if there's hope for one to be signed in the near future.
Clerk Almus, can you speak to that?
Unfortunately, I am not sure who is heading that up, so I cannot, Chair McLeod.
Okay. And I believe that, Acting CIO Skinner.
Thank you, Chair. This is one that I think has simply fallen to the wayside with the things that have been happening lately. I have seen a draft of the agreement with the BIA come forward in the last few months. So this is something we could take away for follow-up response at the next meeting, if not sooner.
Does that assist, Councillor Berman?
Yes, absolutely. And it wasn't something I wanted to make a priority. I just wanted a heads up on where it was. So that's great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Acting CAO and Clerk, for those. Any other questions or comments from the committee? And seeing none, we're going to vote on accepting these reports. Clerk Almus, I'm sorry, do I have to read the whole darn thing again? This is the second time I've ever chaired a meeting, so please bear with me.
I think what you provided is sufficient.
Great. And so call the question. Excellent. And that is carried. We move on now to number 8, the consent agenda. And it is moved by Mayor Saunderson and seconded by Councillor Madigan that the general consent agenda, having been given due consideration by the standing committee, be received. And on that, we have 8.1 various letters, support for conservation authorities from the city of Sault Ste. Marie and the town of Ajax. And does any of the committee wish to speak to either of these two items on the consent agenda? I will just very quickly speak to it, saying how having seen this council support our local conservation authority, it is quite heartening to see the sort of floodgates of other municipalities across Ontario taking the same action. And I'm very proud of this council that we were on the leading edge of that. I think I can count somewhere around, I think the last count was 70 municipalities across Ontario have written similar letters to this. I could have that number wrong, but anyway, it is heartening to see those. And so that is what I have to say regarding these two letters. And I will call the question on accepting the consent agenda, and that is passed. And then we move into departmental updates. And I believe we actually have 3, although the agenda reflects that there are 2, and we may even have 4, depending on whether we want to ask some questions of our department heads. But I'd like to begin, I think, with Sarah Almas on the committee and board public participation and orientation update. Clerk Almas.
Certainly. I thought, thank you, Chair McLeod, to the committee. I thought I would share this information for the committee's benefit, as well as the public that's viewing. All of our committees and boards now are resuming their regular meeting schedule beginning this month. The public is encouraged to participate through this Zoom meeting platform. So there is public participation opportunities. We've been getting a few inquiries with people concerned that they weren't able to participate. One of the learning curves that we actually experienced today, we've been sharing the link via the agenda. However, we hadn't had the phone number included too, because you may participate either through your computer, iPad, smartphone, or you can use a landline and call in to participate. So those, all the link information is going to be published on all of the committee and board agendas. So that's where you'll be able to easily access that information. Through the Zoom webinar platform, only registered deputations will be provided the video presence, and those wishing to ask questions or provide their comments will be invited to participate through the at the appropriate time. And those participants that join our meetings as attendees will only have audio access, so you will not be able to see a video feature from them. To register for an agenda as a deputation, as a registered member, it says my audio is temporarily muted. Can everybody still hear me? Okay, perfect. To register for the agenda, we need to be
Yes, we've lost your audio just for a second. Oh, you're back.
there. Okay. All individuals will be asked to state their name prior to addressing the committee or board before they speak. Staff will be available on the call to mute and unmute. So again, if anybody does get disruptive, we do have that ability. I know that there was some concern over advertising the Zoom platform coordinates in the event that we get Zoom bombers. But that could happen in a council chamber too, so we're prepared to address that. Also, individuals are welcome to provide any questions or feedback during the meeting in the comment section, so they can leave their information there as well. Again, if you're joining the meetings just as a delegation, you're provided 5 minutes max to speak to the committee or board. If you are registered in advance, then you're provided 10 minutes and require your presentation material prior to the meetings. I think that
You've muted again. There you go.
Can you hear me? Perfect. As for the committee and board orientations, we are scheduling them for next week through a Zoom platform for all of our new members. We're also offering this to all of our existing members that want to have a refresh. So all that information will be shared shortly. I also want to do a quick shout out for the recruitment we're doing for our new active transportation and trails advisory committee. So if anybody's interested in that, we welcome your requests. You can email clerk@collingwood.ca and we can provide you with a quick access to the application form, or you can go right through our website to our iCompass meeting platform and apply directly online. And that's it for me today. Thank you.
Thank you, Clerk Almus. Are there any questions or comments from any of the members of the committee or Clerk Almus? Super. Thank you. And so we move on. Clerk Almus, we do move on. We don't go to the thank you. We're going to ask Director Culver. He has got an update from Parks, Recreation and Culture regarding the mural project on the Shipyard Medical Center building, as well as the mural project on Huron Street, which I've been eagerly watching take shape in the last few days. Also, our town support for social services and an update on Rallypoint. Director Culver.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to actually share my screen here so you don't have to look at the isolation cabin. Do this. There we go. Actually, it sounds like a lot of updates, but I'll actually be able to go through it pretty quickly. So we mentioned about the, can everybody see my screen okay? Yes. Oh, wow, I've got everybody all over the place here. Okay, so we mentioned about the Shipyard Medical Center. This is the property on the corner of St. Marie Street and First Street or Huron Street. And everybody was familiar with the Heading Dockside mural, which was up there for 15 or 17 years, I think. We took it down last year because of its state of repair and potential liabilities that were related to keeping it up there. And we've engaged in the public art process to generate a new mural for the space with the blessing of the building's owners and council funding the project. So this process is lengthy, but where we started was 31 proposals received in the first call to artists. 4 artists were shortlisted. And on the left-hand side, you can see a portion of the proposals that the committee had selected. The committee members on the right, plus the building owner and a few others, are members of this ad hoc committee that is working on selection. They've just gone through a process where they were interviewing each artist based on their submission to get a sense of why and sort of the basis for what might end up on the building. They're going to be making an extremely difficult decision, mostly because it's subjective in nature, as art being what it is, it's subjective. But in accordance with the public art policy, the decision rests in their hands. They're very capable hands. And the completion of that process will actually have the artist start work through the spring and summer. And then if all goes according to plan, in the fall, we'll be locating this mural on the side of the Shipyard's amphitheater, or sorry, Shipyard's Medical Center, not the amphitheater. Yeah, so that's just sort of a quick update for council's purposes. If I have any questions before I move on, oh yeah, actually I'll ask for questions if there's anything from anyone before I move on to the latest mural project. Are there any questions from council? I see none, so I will move on to the next update. The mural project on Huron Street, and as Chair McLeod mentioned, it's underway. The picture you see on this slide is actually Blaise Waradarma, who is he's farther along than that, actually. It's got some more parts to it. And as well, other artists have begun their work, those artists being Lily Findley, Ruth Hurdle, and Sam Nellick. We're really grateful for the rapid response to a very rapid turnaround on a call to artists. We're also extremely grateful to Streetcar Developments, who are the owners of that property, and Les Mallons, who really quickly responded to me and provided support in the form of shoring up the hoarding, straightening it out, and getting everything cleared for us to be able to proceed. We're actually still in conversation. There's another section to be covered if we find an artist, and we're in conversations with a couple of artists who may adopt that section and add a 5th presentation. So anyway, this is where we're at. Everybody should hopefully enjoy watching them come up. It's kind of cool to see it in action. And I would like to mention that all social and physical distancing protocols are being observed. People are working away from each other, and we're doing the best we can to actually make their work sequential so that they don't have to be on site at the same time. If there are any questions from members of the committee?
Committee members? I have a question actually, Director Culver.
Sure.
I have two. We're paying these artists? Are we providing their supplies, or how did this deal come together?
Thank you, Chair. It's a great question. So our existing budget for supporting culture and art in the community is being used to pay the artists, yes, as well as provide them a stipend for materials that they may need. So each artist is actually being paid. This was actually one of the reasons why we expedited this project, is because at this time it's very, very difficult for artists in our community to maintain and sustain themselves. So albeit it's a short and small, it's not a large amount of money, but it's something, and we found it that the artists are really appreciative.
My second question is, I know there are other places in town where there are large sections of hoardings. Have we contemplated covering them all with this sort of stuff? Look, more work. You're welcome.
Through you. No, we haven't contemplated a widespread application of this program. I think we did this really quickly because it seemed to be responding to the COVID situation. It's also temporary in nature, so these investments are temporary. We did have some questions. Actually, there were members of council that asked about the ability to sort of retain these works after they're completed. We can definitely look into that, but our agreements with the artists don't include sort of ongoing licensing rights. So we're just sort of looking at this as a way to sort of give people a little inspiration during a time when everyone needs it. But certainly if council's will was for us to look at expansion of the project, we could evaluate that and come back with a recommendation of what that looks like.
Thank you.
And with no other questions, I'll just move on. So I think all of council members in this committee are aware that the town's taken on a bit of an unusual role of getting involved in the social services supports. The primary role that we took on was to provide this kind of facilitator activation of social services roundtable. This was something that was sort of, I would say, very loosely based on the Healthy Kids Community Challenge project, where different agencies within the community came together to help support a provincial concept funded by the province. In this case, it was really about capacity building within all of the various organizations, creating a network that would see common objectives identified, and potentially some give and take within the network that will allow for capacities to grow. Our current focus, as the slide says, is on directing people through the front door of 211, because this is our best opportunity, to get people connected with the services they need. There's some expertise as well as some access provided there at the 211 front door. But also it's a way for us to get measurement and start getting an understanding of what kinds of needs there are in the community. And it's actually appropriate that this week is Mental Health Week for Children, because mental health is one of the #1 asks that is coming through the front door of 211 based on the reports we're receiving. Early on, there were things like food security, and then there was questions about housing and financial supports. But more and more, it seems like mental health and access to mental health services is something that the public is really looking for. So 211 is helping to give that direction and provide people access in a way to find the support they're looking for. And I think our next meeting is tomorrow, and this virtual platform that's mentioned on the slide is something that'll be introduced to the group tomorrow, a way for them to connect even further. Moving on, the other area that we've been trying to develop some support is kind of creating what we call this sort of Collingwood Together Hub. So this starting point of this was something that was responding to lots of questions of the community about how can I help. So we created a volunteer portal, which everyone I think is now familiar with. And at this point, we're well over 150 volunteers. And then we had to create a way to actually activate the volunteers. And so that's been done with some support from the Rotary Club, both Rotary Clubs coming together in a collaborative project to basically become the switchboard for needs generated through 211 that then become implemented through the volunteer database. And it seems very simple. It seems like there's people who want to help and all you got to do is tell them what to do and they do it. But there is a lot of process involved in a lot of things that have to be covered off. You know, we want to first of all make sure that the services are, if we say we're going to do something, we want to make sure it's done. And so Rotary has got, we've now developed really good protocols to ensure that. Also, we want to maintain social distance and assume, you know, make sure that people are protecting themselves and the clients that are engaging the service. So there's lots and lots and lots of pieces and parts in play. Jennifer Parker obviously has been instrumental in developing this really interesting and full Google Doc hub that allows everybody to be talking to the same documents. And so anyway, so really excited to see it underway. We've had some needs requests come in and they've been able to be delivered on. And so we're looking forward to continuing to grow that with Rotary support. And I have to make a special mention of Jeanine Faubert, John Saul, James Saunders, and John McNiven, who are all part of the Rotary response to this need. So really appreciative. They've been amazing. And then next thing is the Mayor's initiative is everybody understands he's been active in trying to secure PPE wherever it could be helpful. The Optimist Club, and specifically I'll mention David Hearn by name, have been instrumental in providing some pivot point for us to be able to sort of both take in what both the community and manufacturers, et cetera, are offering, and then be able to create a bit of a supply chain that will help end users access what they actually need. And one of the pieces of this is to understand what they actually need, because there is some discrepancy and disparity in terms of understanding what the actual needs are. In other words, there are a number of masks that you can use. Which mask is the right mask to use in which situation? So there's still some learning going on. And we're looking at supporting both this inventory that's being established with information that's both shared with and from the roundtable, so that again, people are asking for the right things and they're getting the right things, and we're not, you know, wasting resources unnecessarily or providing incorrect responses. So there's still a bit of work to go on there. It's this supply chain review is still underway, but it is exciting to watch this community step up. And then just on this topic, the last piece I'm going to show you, and this is actually, I would say, the inspiration of CAO Skinner, because she likes flowcharts, and I was not a fan of flowcharts until I started making them, and now I am a fan of flowcharts. But this deck will be shared with council, basically to sort of start describing a little bit how the relationship of all these different moving parts works. So you can kind of see in the center here, this Collingwood Together part, that represents sort of the town action point. This is the hub, I would say. It's where the volunteer database lives. It's where the service clubs are pivoting from. And it's where Jen Parker kind of sits. This is her chair. We'll call it the throne of swords or whatever from Game of Thrones. But this is sort of us. Broad community is feeding into both a perception of needs, because there's a lot of people, early on we found out there's a lot of people who are assuming there's a lot of needs, but they can't really identify or don't have enough data to understand what the need might be. So there's a perception of needs. And there's also people who are saying, listen, I just want to help. On the other side, there's actually people who are in need, and obviously in need, and they may be struggling to find access to the resources. So the way that they would get in and be through the 211 front door, ideally, that would help us to understand who's out there and what the accumulation of needs are. Or they've already got a linkage, and our social service providers are excellent at what they do. So obviously they're going directly to those places at the time. This yellow box here is sort of where we are providing a temporary interfacing, because what we're finding sometimes is that there are unmet needs that are dropping out. So 211 will get a call and they don't have a place to send the person. So this volunteer resource, in a limited way, and I will admit straight up front that it is in a limited way, we can't solve all the problems, but some of these unmet needs will find their way into our Collingwood Together Hub. We'll be able to connect them with the volunteer database, with the PPE they might need access to, or some other form of support that's possible within this, like I say, limited resource that's been developed temporarily in this Collingwood Together Hub. And then that would actually allow us to sort of keep working with 211 to make sure that we're delivering on the needs and measuring. The service providers, as I mentioned before, they're part of this social service roundtable, as is 211. Information from the roundtable will go to them and back, from 211 to the roundtable and back, and from our Collingwood Together Hub and back. So this is very much sort of the representation of the roundtable. On the other side, with perception of needs, information is going to council. Obviously, we hear from you guys whenever we hear from the community, and that's awesome, because now that we have a system, they actually have some pretty good answers most of the time for how we can help. Council is obviously working very closely with us in the hub, as we're staff of council, and they're getting updates, feedbacks, and they're making requests, and they're receiving requests from public. And then over here we have our portal. So this is the COVID response portal that was established very early on, I would say remarkably early on, allowing people to have access to consistent information that's populated by the town, or access to other resources as needed. As well, we're looking for the good news stories and things like that that help inspire our town. So this is all happening over here at the /COVID portal. So with all that together, you may need some time, like I did, to kind of wrap your head around this. Again, I'm not steeped in flowcharts, but I do like this one, and I think it does describe us right now and as how we're working. Before I move on from the social service sector, is there any questions of the committee? And I just have some final quick things.
Mayor Saunderson has a question.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Dean. I guess the first question is, because I'm getting used to flowcharts too. I'm wondering if we can get a copy of this excellent flowchart, because it's extremely informative and helpful. And I do want to thank you and all staff who've been involved in putting this stuff together. There was no script for this, and I think you've done a great job in reaching out and coordinating and being a connector of dots and resources, which I think is a critical role for us at the town. And you mentioned a couple of needs in the last slide of calls you were getting from food security and financial supports right to the children's mental health. And I'm just wondering if you can give us a sense of the referrals or needs we've been able to direct people to get them assistance versus what you've got here in the yellow box as the unmet needs. And if you could qualify some of those unmet needs for us.
Yeah, so through you, Chair, I'm not aware of all the needs that have come through to the hub. I'll be honest with you. I'm aware of the first one because that was our pilot, our way of trying to figuring out whether the system we had would work or not. And it was for a person of an older age who has had a broken ankle and therefore was unable to reach a grocery store. And so they reached out to 211. 211 identified it as a need they couldn't meet under the social service organizations that they're tied into. So that came to the hub. Within the hub, we were able to line up a volunteer, address the need. And as I understand it, one of the things that happened as a result was this person now is tapped into that system for a few other supports as well. But they got the groceries they were looking for. Obviously they pay for the groceries, they order the groceries. Our service is really just delivering the groceries. But that was an early one. I think a few of them have been around just contact with some of our senior members of our community who are not able to be in contact, whether they're distanced from their family or they just need to have someone to talk to. So that has been another unmet need that has sort of emerged, and some of our volunteers are looking after things like that. I don't have the full roster. I don't think the need has been, huge volume at this point, but again, we're trying to navigate, getting people to the front door of 211 so that we can find out and find where the gaps are and hopefully step in to address them.
And just by way of quick follow-up, thanks for that, Dean. And I think we've seen a couple of examples in regional programs, whether it be the mental health through the OPP and also the paramedics identification of those in need for various reasons. I think one of the great things about this program is making the connections and understanding what's out there, and then being able to make the connection to the suitable programs and get those people on the radar so that they're able to connect with the programs they need. Because I think a lot of the stuff is there already. It's a matter of just connecting the dots. So thank you very much for all that great work.
My pleasure.
Any other questions from or comments from the committee? Okay, continue, Director.
All right,
Culver.
so we're almost done here. So Rallypoint, the council and committee are familiar with the Rallypoint initiative, where PRC was trying to figure out what does it look like in a world where we're not bringing people together physically. And so we created this sort of virtual network, which now has over 110 offerings listed on it. I can note that of the 110, 5 of them are direct productions of the town of Collingwood. There are 35 that are coming from our local community. That list grew really fast. We were really kind of shocked by the response of people who were able to provide kind of pivot, as it were, using our favorite word these days, to provide services to their fellow community members, either for profit. Some are actually, this is a continuation of their business, or others, it's been not for profit. It's been, I just want to reach out and use either our not-for-profit foundation or whatever to step up and help the community. And then we've been able to sort of put together or curate, I would like to use the word, the 70 different experiences from around the globe, ranging in nature. And a quick note, this is my daughter taking her martial arts lesson. In COVID times, we don't have access to models. So my living room and my wife's office actually, and our martial arts instructor for my daughter is how we make do and set pictures up. And on the next page, you'll see, this is actually Jen Parker's back, because this sort of represents the chair yoga offering that we do each week. It's actually an amazing program that was done in real life at one point, and nowadays has to be done via Zoom, but it has a loyal following of people. I'm not sure if Jen does chair yoga each week. I'm pretty sure she doesn't, but she facilitates it. She looks after making sure that people are connecting and going through the learning curve of Zoom and whatever else. The virtual experience, as I mentioned, I think this is the Canada's Wonderland roller coaster, which is kind of cool. And if you're inventive and stick your kid in a laundry basket, I guess you can make it even more special. This is one of our community providers, so Collingwood Web Design, offering an opportunity to go and grab some coloring pages to help keep your kids active at home and keep their minds stimulated. So that kind of sums up our update on the whole. The last part being just this Rallypoint piece that I think it'd be interesting for council to be aware of. And I'm happy to take any questions if you happen to have any.
Are there any questions for Director Culver from our committee? I am not seeing any yellow signs. I have just a couple of questions for you, Director Culver, if you have a moment. First of all, how is it that you got the isolation cabin and she got the house? Sorry, that's.
I don't know. Some days I think I won, and some days I think that I didn't. I'm freezing cold out here today, but other days it's great not to have kids running around in the background and getting them all set up. She swears that once a week she's going to take over and take my cabin away from me.
I see. Well, as long as there's no screw-nails or anything dangerous on the floor for her to kick. In seriousness, on Friday, we received news from the provincial government regarding capital projects for municipalities to resume. And I know from a resident who contacted me today that there is some movement by the town in that department almost immediately. Could you perhaps, in addition to the update that you've just provided, possibly let us know, because we had some doozies of capital projects that were on their way this summer that were COVIDized. Could you give us an update on where we stand? Like, I mean, it's been 3 days, so I don't have high expectations, but.
No, I'll do my best. I wouldn't say that I have an update per se, except to say that staff have been reviewing capital projects overall, and there's a presentation that I believe is coming to the SIC on Wednesday that will actually have a bit of an overarching perspective on how staff have viewed all projects, kind of regardless of COVID, but recognizing that COVID is going to put some conditions on that list in terms of what can happen and when. I think, just from the big three that I think you're referring to in the PRC world, Fisher Field, we're still waiting on the provincial government. We're hopeful that, such ideas as stimulus funding might support, that project and get some accelerated funding happening soon. But we're pretty much ready to go with tenders. We're following some response from the province on that one. On the splash pad, we've been carrying on in the background on engineering discussions. There's some infrastructure work that we've recently sort of, I think, kind of come down to the short strokes on. And overall sort of budget management, trying to figure out, what has to live and how we're going to live within the budget that was afforded by council's approval. We're recognizing that there are parts that will happen and parts that will have to be deferred to future phases, which is normal, but at the same time, we'll be able to provide council the full accounting and an update of all of that. But again, depending on how prioritization works and again, how everything flows, we could stay on schedule potentially, which would really having us have a splash pad in place by the end of this year, roughly speaking. So it's next spring, it would be live. That's not a promise. That's simply me saying that's sort of where we're at right now in terms of our estimation of things. And then the park at Sunset Point, the playground at Sunset Point, we had some spring projects that may be deferred, or we may be able to squeeze them out before the plan was to go quiet, or if depending on how provincial regulations. One of the reasons why we were going quiet was because the volume in the park was going to become a problem for us to manage in the realm of construction. So we might be able to take a different look at that if, for example, playgrounds are off limits. So if we're building playgrounds and then wrapping them, for example, that may happen. But there is also some development time, like actual facility building, feature building that has to happen. So really that's sort of up in the air. But again, we had not planned to be completed before the end of this year. So theoretically, we could be on track still, subject to some wiggle room and some adjustments made based on COVID and all the rest of it. So our big three, I think, are more or less where they were, with the potential for them to sort of move a little bit farther down the timeline. But we've been active on them in the background, all of them, and we would still love to see things completed as soon as possible.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of the committee? All right. Thank you, Director Culver. And we're going to also get an update from our acting CAO, I believe, regarding green initiatives in light of, well, I'm not entirely sure, but I know that you're going to be speaking to us, acting CAO Skinner. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair McLeod. Well, I guess green initiatives on a day when we're wearing green, and two different fields, but we all like green. So it was at the Special Initiatives Committee that we first started talking about climate change, and our intention is to go back to that committee. However, it has been a bit of time, so I'd expressed a desire to provide you, this committee, with an update. And typically the green type initiatives would come through this committee, so I think it is entirely appropriate. There's many thank yous due to the update that I'm able to provide you. Michelle Blanchet, our health and safety lead, coordinator, has been doing a lot of work on this. She's pretty busy with health and safety given COVID times, so I know she's listening in, but I'll deliver the update today. And the town's green team has provided much input as well. We know there's been considerable interest and leadership from council on these topics. And when the report comes back, it's going to span a number of items, including the resolution about the actions that we are and should be doing to combat climate change. The suggestion that we enter the Partners for Climate Protection program offered by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. The elimination of all single-use plastics in municipal facilities report back, and the communication that people the single-use disposable wipes that are noted as flushable are not actually flushable. And that one's the quickest update because we have done a good amount of communication on that piece, and I would consider it to be completed for now. Not that it's anything that we'd want to stop talking about, because it's very important that people not flush those single-use wipes. They cause a lot of problems at the waste treatment plant. And as well, we're going to talk about performance measures for green initiatives in Collingwood. So a few of the updates today include that I think the committee is reasonably well updated on the climate change initiatives underway in our own operations. I'm not going to go into those again, although they're reasonably well set out on our website, if anyone needs those. We've uncovered a number of other climate change initiatives underway in Collingwood. These include that Simcoe County has changed their waste collection schedule a few months ago to promote the Green Bin program. We've had some increases in transit ridership attributed to longer hours pre-COVID. And we're looking forward to the Grey County bus route that will link ourselves to points west and southerly. And we have a very active Collingwood climate change action team that I'm going to mention in a moment. I've also had an opportunity to meet with several very active high school students who have some of their own initiatives and had made some interesting recommendations for the town. We've looked at climate change performance measures and overall found out that we have not benchmarked the overall greenhouse gas production within the geographic area of Collingwood. However, we have set out to, and we have benchmarked the consumption of electricity and natural gas by the town, and we have a goal to reduce it by 10% by 2024. And pre-COVID, we were doing very well on that, in part due to some large water treatment changes. And COVID probably has helped as well temporarily. And we have an intention to electrify the town's passenger fleet. So we're going to do a few more of those in 2020 as our intention. We have some green initiatives underway in the town's own operations, pending some provincial funding, which we hope will, or other funding, which we hope will still come through. We want to collaborate with Georgian Bay Forever on a pilot project to remove microplastics from washing machine effluents. In 2020, in collaboration with Georgian Bay Forever and potentially other funders, we're looking to install 2 sea bins in the Collingwood Harbour. And this is a type of machine that pulls things that float on the water surface down into the machine itself so that we can get rid of water, floating gas or oil, things like that. We have a few other things underway, and there's intention to use things like the update to the water and wastewater rates when they're implemented to use the costing structure to promote water conservation. On the performance measures side, Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority has some performance measures for river and groundwater quality, which they've recently published, and you can find them if you Google under the Blue Mountains Sub-Watershed Health Check and look for Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority's publications there. There's some reports on air quality, but the closest station is in Barrie. If you're looking at air quality in Collingwood, cursory review didn't indicate any air quality concerns for our area. And as well, there's beach water quality testing that's being done by the health unit, and we're still liaising with them. With respect to the recommendation that Collingwood participate in the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Partners for Climate Protection program, it's actually a 5-step program, a milestone framework that if we participate, the intention would be from the program that we move through the framework within 10 years. It does look like a good program. Many municipalities participate, and in fact, Collingwood in the past had been previously enrolled in this program. And the first milestone would be to create a baseline emissions inventory and forecast for greenhouse gases in the Collingwood area. Since we don't have an emissions inventory, we also reviewed a number of other climate action plans from other communities and places like Kingston, Whistler, several others that were well known and considered to be well done by people in the industry. And a few common themes that the group is considering include significant public engagement and awareness, integrating climate change into local urban planning and building, including looking at reducing the footprint of new buildings and incentive for measuring and reducing energy use in existing buildings, district energy or local energy production, reduction and electrification of transportation, and a vulnerability and risk assessment due to climate change, including things like tourism and our local industries and what that would mean over time as climate change progressed. So just to sum up, there's a range of items that staff are looking into, reasonable options. And while I'm not recommending them today, I just wanted to put them on your horizon. One is to set up or join the existing community forum for climate change and become active participants as a community, as a town. To potentially support and expand the family-based greenhouse gas benchmarking in collaboration with the Collingwood Climate Action Team. We wanted to ensure that climate change and green considerations are available for when council and committees make decisions, for example, by inserting this into reports that decision makers would receive as a consideration. Proceeding on a generous donation that's been suggested to the town to take on a pilot solar project at a municipal facility, and to proceed with enhanced water quality testing for the cold water streams in Collingwood, which was included in the approved 2020 budget in concert with Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority. We're also considering whether we should be moving quickly on an emissions inventory to benchmark our overall greenhouse gas production so that we can understand the story of emissions that are actually being produced in Collingwood. This is a side benefit of being something that's a COVID-friendly initiative that can be done remotely. And finally, there are some challenges with having enough staff resources to implement this work. So far, we've used innovative approaches, and we're considering what might be the best, most responsible options for moving this piece forward in Collingwood. So, Chair, I'd be pleased to hear any suggestions from the committee and feedback. Otherwise, we are targeting at the earliest, and I hope that we will achieve that, to come back in the early June SIC with a full written report and recommendations.
Thank you, Acting CAO Skinner. Mayor Saunderson has a question.
My apologies. I've got two screens here and I can't get the mouse going the right way. So through you, Madam Chair, to Sonia, that's a great report. And I know we've been, we're in parallel working with UN on the sustainability, Sustainable Development Goal number 11. I'm just wondering if we're looking at trying to dovetail some of these initiatives so that we can leverage some funding that might be available.
Absolutely. We would want to leverage the, through you, Chair.
All is well.
Okay, good. We would want to leverage the UN Habitat Sustainability Pilot. And also, I think there's several initiatives in the draft strategic plan, community-based strategic plan that was out for public consultation early in this year that we would want to leverage as well. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, very, very well integrated, I think, and right in line with the sustainability pieces from the UN.
Perfect, thanks.
Any other questions from the committee? All right, we'll say thank you to Acting CAO Skinner, and I believe that brings us very nearly to the end of departmental updates. And I'm going to say, this is going to be reminiscent of my previous career. The phone number to call in for today's meeting is 1-647-374 4685, because we are just about heading into item number 10 on the agenda, which is public delegations. And if someone would like to have things to say, that is one of the ways that they can address this committee. But before we move, so again, that's 647-374-4685, just in case there is a member of the public who wanted to speak. Before we move on to item number 10, though, do we have any other department heads in attendance who have updates for us on any of the situations under their purview? I don't see any hands going up from our department heads. I have actually a question for one of our department heads, and that is for Treasurer Leonard, who I see is with us on the screen. And I wonder if Treasurer Leonard could answer a question from the chair.
And try.
Thank you. So it's a similar question that I asked to Director Culver a few minutes ago, because we did get some news on Friday from the provincial government regarding capital projects and the fact that municipalities may now proceed with capital project construction work and so on. And I'm wondering, because I know that we're expecting to hear from you on Wednesday at our Strategic Initiatives Committee with a bit of an update on our on the impact of COVID on our budget. I wonder if the announcement on Friday is going to have an impact on that report.
Well, to you, Madam Chair, I spent a great deal of time on Friday doing some calculations to arrive at areas that I thought would be affected by the COVID, and then Premier Ford made the announcement and I had to do it all over again today. So I don't know, hopefully I'll be able to provide some information on that. But in terms of our capital projects and the funding for them, the vast majority of that funding is coming from reserve funds or development charges. And there's very, very little tax dollars being spent on capital. I think it's 375,000 or thereabouts. So if we can get the projects tendered, we have the money to carry on with the bigger portions of them. I hope that helps.
It does very much. Thank you. Any other questions from members of the committee for during this particular section of our agenda for updates from departments? All right, seeing none, we're going to, Councillor Madigan.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you much for the good news. I guess I missed the public announcement regarding this community projects. I thought right now at this point, the agreement's just between the federal and the provincial governments. That wasn't going to be mentioned yet. I guess I just missed that. So if somebody could send that to me, that would be great, because I haven't seen that it was put out there for a press release yet.
I'm not entirely sure I know what you're, okay, that would be fine. We'll make sure that we get you the information you request. Councillor Bergman.
Yes, my apologies. That was what some of you know what it was about. It was Dr. Young giving me some important results. So I just rushed away and forgot to excuse myself. So I apologize and I'm back. Did I miss anything exciting?
Of course. You will have to rewatch it on our YouTube channel. And what we have done, however, is moved on to item 10 in our agenda, which is public delegations. And we've made sure that the phone number for anyone who would like to participate in this is available. And it is 1-647-374-4685. And I'm going to actually turn to Clerk Almus, because I actually do see someone with that phone number on my screen.
So I've changed my my label to indicate the phone number. So
Oh, I see.
we do have some public attendees in the wait room. So if anybody does wish to speak, you can either enter your question in the Q&A or raise your hand and staff will unmute you.
We'll give a few seconds for that. And I'm seeing none. And so I think that brings us to item 11 on our agenda, which is other business. And do we have any other business from this committee? Members? Thank you. None from any. And that brings us to item number 12. And it is moved by Councillor Berman. That the Corporate and Community Services Standing Committee be hereby adjourned at 2:58 p.m. Do I have, I don't think I need a mover, but I do need the rest of you to agree, and there we go. And so this meeting stands adjourned. Thank you very much.